Today I'll be showing you how to draw this and paint it using watercolor. A watercolor paper. This is 270 GSM. It has a bit of a texture that is taking up the entire space or most of it. So first I like to roughly plan the figures before I get into the details. So let's say this is where the face of the mother is going to be and the face of the baby overlaps a little. I have to draw the figure or the object that is at the front. Here it's the face of the baby. So I don't usually draw kids, so I'm not the biggest expert when it comes to that, but I know that the face is going to be a little stubby and the nose is going to be very small and rounded. The eyes are going to be large and far apart. The cheeks will be a little chubby at the base, and the gap between the nose and the lips will be a little more than it is for adults. The chin is not going to be fully formed, and this will be the shoulder. The hand is at the face, near the face. It's folded, the face of the mother, which is at the back. So I'm drawing it like that. And this is the center axis for the face of the mother, that center line. I'm drawing the line for the jaw. You can see that for the mother, the chin is quite developed compared to how it was for the child. Strands of hair over her face to frame it nicely. This is where the ear will be same level as the base of the nose. So I'm being very careful about the sketch. So you can see that I'm not someone that goes into too much of detail with the hands or the fingers, because I feel like it's not necessary for my style of painting. But if you are going for a more realistic style, you can refer more pictures of hands to understand the shapes better. But for me, I feel like this goes with the overall style. We are not drawing it because the baby is on top, but then we need to figure out the proportion. So I'm lightly mapping it out without even touching my pencil to the paper. I'm drawing that cloth or that turban kind of thing that Krishna wears. The head does look too big, but not in a way that looks bad. It's certainly not how I expected. Throughout the process of sketching or painting, we have to evaluate the picture with our eyes and see what looks right, what needs to be corrected. So it's constantly observing and analyzing the shapes rather than just drawing. Like even now the nose is looking a little too defined for my liking. And she's wearing a blouse with a small sleeve. We have the basic sketch, and from here things cannot go wrong. A seated figure. So when a person is seated, the torso is going to get shortened a little than it is when they're standing. Those braid kind of hairstyle, because a mother has that motherly hairstyle. It's not too bad, just not the cutest baby that ever lived. Eyeliner like this one here. It's from Artline. It's waterproof, so I'll use this to outline the sketch. I'm going to use black watercolor to shade the features of the face, because if you get this wrong, the entire picture will be spoiled. But if you get the face right, then everything else will fall into place. Below the eyebrows, fine brush. On both sides below the eyebrows, I'm adding that shadow because that's where the hollow or that receding part will be. So once you get the difficult bits to look right, then you can go ahead with the rest. In that same way, I'm going to add the shadows to Krishna's face. This side will be in shadow mostly because the light source is from here. The shadows will be cast on the opposite side. And wherever there is a harsh edge of paint, you can simply rinse your brush in water, wipe it off on a cloth, and then blend out that harsh edge. So I'm planning to draw the minute details like that of the lips off camera because I want to get closer to the picture to make sure that I'm not making any mistakes. Now I'm taking a slightly bigger brush. It's in the size 4. Light source will be from here. So the shadows will be on the opposite side. So loosely adding that black. And there'll be some shadows on the neck as well, cast by the face. I'm rinsing my brush in water and taking away these sharp edges. And also the sides of the nose, because there's not much of fat or muscle definition there, will usually be in shadows. And you can see that this is a very pale gray at this point. We're not aiming for the actual dark tone. We want to work with light layers of color and then add the depth wherever necessary in subsequent layers instead of doing it all at once. A bit of highlight in this part, and I rinsed and wiped the brush. Dark to light gradient on the head because the head is a round object or a round shape, and we want to suggest that with how we should. You can see that I'm not rushing the process at all. You know, this is not a landscape painting or a normal kind of watercolor. It has that quality of an illustration. So we don't want to make too many mistakes. We do want a bit of precision. So I'm taking my time with the tones. So whenever you're working with black and white, you'll get a better understanding of tonal values. That is the darkness of a color. Because when you use color straight away, it will create a distraction from the tones. Because you'll be distracted by the brightness or the particular hue of a color. And that can make you miss out, or that can make it difficult to understand the tonal values. So the more tonal values there are in a picture, the more interesting it will look. In watercolor, the highlights will be the white of the paper or the lightest tones. You can add the highlights separately with gouache or acrylic, but in the traditional method, the paper white or the lighter washes are going to peek through, and those will serve as the highlights. Let's see, the light is from here. So the arm, this part of the arm will have the shadow at the base. So I'm laying down a stroke of grey, wiping my brush after rinsing it, and then dragging it along the edge to create that softer transition. For all the objects, you have to create that light and shadow instead of painting it in one flat stroke of color. Even for Krishna's clothing method, leaving out some areas of highlight and then adding shadows to the rest. So there is this tendency to paint the darkest color right away and be done with it. Make sure that you're not falling for that. Below the hair, near the face, there'll be a shadow cast by the hair. So I'm just following the lines that I made for the initial sketch. And the sides of the body, which is opposite to the light source, will have more shadows, and blending it out towards the center. The areas that are highlighted will draw the attention of the viewer, so you don't want to add highlights all over or too much of a contrast where you don't want the attention to go. Painting, there'll be this area or that spot called the focal point, which attracts the most attention from the viewer. So here I would say the focal point is the face, and the rest just serve as the background. So we don't want to create any dramatic light and shadow contrasts on the body, which can take away from the focal point. Ideally, you should always start with the background, but because I was not sure about how the faces would turn out, I wanted to paint it first. So right now I'm taking a flat brush which has natural hair. This is called squirrel hair or sable hair, and it's a size 10. It holds a lot of water. So using just plain water, I'm going to wet the background, making sure that I'm not painting over the figures, just the outsides on both sides. And also you want to have a little less water on your brush, otherwise it can drip down the face and give you unnecessary patches. Any gaps near the body we can fill in using a smaller brush as we paint. So this layer of water makes sure that the background colors spread easily without too many brush strokes. If we add a lot of brush strokes to the background, what happens is more attention will go to the background and it will take away from the figure. Same brush, and dipping it into my mix of black and water. Brush is loaded with paint. I'm removing some of it on the cloth and then applying it very loosely to the background, almost the same direction. You can see that I'm not being too careful near the figure because we don't want too many white gaps between the background and the figure. So you can take the brush very close to the figure, even overlap a little because it's the same tone as the figure, so it's not really going to matter. You can see that I'm following the same direction, a vertical stroke. Even horizontal is fine, but I feel like vertical is more easy. For a vertical composition, this one is vertically composed. Mixing more black so that there is more paint and less water. But make sure that whenever you are mixing watercolor paints, it's never a creamy consistency, like how it feels out of the tube. You don't want that consistency, no matter how dark you want the colors to be. You still want it to be mixed well with water. So now I'm going to take a brush that is about that big. I will mention the size later. It has a fine tip, but it can also be pressed on the surface to create a wider stroke. So I'm taking the black and adding some dots here, because when the paper is wet, the color will blend on its own and it'll give you that nice blurry color for the background so that it looks soft and blurred out. And you know, blurry detail is not going to stand out, so it's not going to compete with the figure. It's going to blend in with the background. That's why I'm working wet on wet, and also on this side to balance that side, because there's too many details here and nothing here, so we have to add some details on this side as well. You can adjust the darkness of the color by adding more water to the mix of paint, which is exactly what I'm doing, because I don't want it to be one flat color of black. So to create more variations, I have added more water here and there to the mix of black to get a gray color. And I'm filling out the gaps because this brush is more pointed. I can actually go near the figure and fill out any white gaps. Make sure that you're not overdoing the details, especially when you're working wet on wet. You know, it's a lot of fun. So we feel like going a little overboard, all of us, me included. So make sure that you're not taking away all the whiteness of the background. And I'm adding some gray color near the figure. Why? Because it'll give us that nice contrast between the figure and the background. You know, when you place a light object against a black background, that lightness is going to pop. So this is where the highlights of the figure is going to be. So when you place a dark background behind that highlight, the highlights are going to show up a lot more to balance it. Some shadows on the side as well. This could be leaves, plants, whatever. Just makes it look like there is something in the back. Adding more black paint to that mix so that there is less water and more paint. And using just the tip of the brush, I'm going to draw some branches here and there. You don't have to connect them all to each other, but we just want it to look like the leaves are connected to a branch. Otherwise it can look like the background is floating. So this gives the suggestion that there is a tree in the background. So from time to time, step back from the picture and squeeze your eyes to see the overall shapes, so that you won't get stuck on the individual detail. So even if it looks very dark right now, the background is almost like overpowering. It's really not going to be that dark once it dries. So I'm adding some lines to suggest that platform she's sitting on. We have that very nice soft hazy background, so that we can now focus on the figure. I'm going to add some lines for the hair, preserving a bit of highlight at the rounded part of the hair, of the head. So for that, I'm using just the tip of the brush and lessening the pressure as we come towards the highlight to get that tapered soft effect. And you can see that I'm following the natural outline of the head, because we are painting a rounded shape. We don't want to paint that with straight lines or horizontal lines, but to suggest that round shape, we can actually follow the outline or the round form of the object, even for our shading, so that we get that three-dimensional look. This is called contour shading, where we follow the contours of an object to shade it. I'm softening it wherever necessary by rinsing my brush and wiping away most of the water, and then dragging it along the edge that looks too defined to make it look softer. Part that is away from the light will be in deep shadows. So I'm just deepening that black. So between the legs, the cloth will be a little loose. It won't be as taut, so that won't catch a lot of highlight. So I'm adding some shadow there. And you can see that I'm painting each shadow as though the object or the shape is rounded. For of course the legs are rounded, and the top part of the thigh will have that projection, or it will stick out a little more than the rest of the leg. So I'm adding the shadows, keeping that in mind, that light tone of gray which we did for the first layer. And I'm leaving some highlight on this side of the arm, and this part of the arm will have more shadows because it's opposite to the light source. On the inside of the forearm as well, so that this is where most of the flesh and the fat will be. So when you add a shadow on both sides and then blend it out towards the highlight, that just makes the figure or the shape look more three-dimensional. Now I'll be using this to add some highlights and loose strands of hair. And I'm using a very fine brush now to draw some dark lines. Where the shadows would be, blending them towards the lighter tones. You can see that I have made some of the shadows really deep. So the figure is going to cast a shadow on this side. So when you add dark tones to the face at this point, you have to be really careful because you don't want to mess it up. Just deepening the shadows on the sides of the nose. I'm adding dark tones little by little to finish the painting. I'm going to add some very dark branches at the front. And the contrast between the dark, sharp edges of the foreground objects and the hazy, soft colors of the background really make the background look that much more blurred or out of focus. Now I want a lot of control because I'm going to be doing the details. So I have taken the pen. Using that, I am drawing the eyebrows